Provost lecture series and also the Templeton series, Bernhard Waldenfels. He is Professor Emeritus at the Ruhr University in Bochum, Germany. He's one of the leading thinkers in what's called continental philosophy. I would say actually in all of philosophy today. He's world class. He's an original thinker, but he's someone who also has great depth of erudition, knowledge of the history of philosophy, contemporary philosophy. He also is very interested in extending philosophical insight into other fields, so that his work on responsive ethics, that we're going to hear something about today, has been influential in medical circles and nursing circles, care circles in Europe, and is becoming recognized in this country. So he is someone who has managed over a remarkable career to have put together a series of some 26 books, some of which are on this series, so that, for instance, recently he's writing a series, Modes of Lived Experience, bodily, aesthetic, social, other modalities of lived experience, which show his genius for coming very close to the way that people really live their lives, how it can be understood differently from a philosophical standpoint, and more particularly from a phenomenological standpoint. There was a discussion at lunch between Don Eide in front of me and Bernhard. Don believes that we're in a period of post-phenomenology, and Bernhard considers himself a phenomenologist. That means a person who gives a description of lived experience from up close on its own terms. So that Bernhard Waldenfels sees himself as having stayed in the phenomenological tradition, but having done so in his own way. So we're really going to hear a speaker today who's really speaking from his own original point of view, nevertheless within the framework of what is called phenomenology, descriptive philosophy. Beginning in 1990, after an early series of books that had to do with establishing the world in terms of its different orders of significance and meaning, leading to a book that's in English, which is Twilight, has the word twilight in it. It has to do with the twilight area between zones of orders of experience. And Bernhard's early work was an effort to delineate these orders and their differences from each other. Orders of meaning, orders of significance, orders of experience. But in 1990, there was a significant turning point with a book called The Sting of the Alien, because he began to feel that the factor of otherness in people's lives, not only other people, but the otherness in ourselves, alienation of every sort that we could imagine, had never been fully addressed philosophically. And in a group of books of great distinction and power, I now count 7 of these in publication, the most central one of which, the longest one of which, is about to appear in English, which will probably have the term answer, well in German it's Antwortregister, what's it going to be in English?
Registers of Responding.
It's going to be called Registers of Responding. That will soon appear, and that will be, I think, a major work for anyone interested in philosophy today to read. So he's been working through a paradigm that has to do with how to take account of the factor of otherness in our lives, and more particularly how, at a very deep level of our experience, we encounter the other, deal with it, respond to it. This will lead to issues of ethics, not only ethics, but also the political, the aesthetic, and many parts of our experience. Today we're going to hear a very special application. He's written this talk just for us today. It's going to be how response ethics, the responsive model, bears on questions of human trust and distrust. So we're going to have a very particular statement meant for this occasion. So let's welcome Professor Waldenfels.
I thank you for inviting me here to Stony Brook. It's not the first time that I'm here, and so I'm glad to come back here, and I am grateful for your introduction of my attempt to continue phenomenology. What I offer today is to say something about your general issue of trust from the point of view of what I call a responsive phenomenology. My paper has three parts. First, a short part on the state of what I call responsive ethics. The second part, responding to others' demand. That's a brief sketch of what I call responsive phenomenology in relation to the other. And the third, the greatest part, advance of trust, turns just to your general topic of trust or confidence. Now I begin with some introductory remarks concerning the status of responsive ethics. Ethics has always revolved around the question as how to live and to act in the right way. This question can be answered in varied ways with regard to aims and values, to laws and norms, to discursive claims to validity, or to consequences. So we distinguish between a teleological, a deontic, or a utilitarian ethics represented by authors such as Aristotle, Hume, Kant, Habermas, or Mill. The special kind of responsive ethics which I propose is not apt to replace the other approaches, but it is able to change the accent. C'est le ton qui fait la musique, c'est le sound qui makes music. Similar, it may be the tone which makes the ethics. The new tone will be named response. Response, that is to say, responding to the other's demand. This sort of response has to be taken not only in the narrow sense of linguistic answers, but in the wider sense of responding on all registers of our bodily experience. There are various registers of response similar to the registers of the organ. We respond by our senses, by our desire, by our memories, by our expectations, by our spatial orientation, by our speaking and acting, including diverse technical fittings. Besides, we can respond not only by words, but also by keeping silence. No answer is also an answer, as a proverb tells us. Now, responding does not constitute a specific act, such as giving information to a foreigner or answering to the doctor's inquiries. Quite similar to the process of meaning something, or similar to the process of aiming at something or of following a rule, the process of responding to has to be taken as a basic trait present in all our behavior toward things, toward ourselves, and towards others. It is precisely this basic trait that I call responsivity. Mostly it remains unnoticed and implicit. Only in special situations responding gets explicit, such as through the order, please answer. Now, in contrast with other sorts of acts, responding is especially characterized by its starting from elsewhere. When responding, we are always incited, attracted, threatened, challenged, or appealed by somewhat or somebody before taking the initiative and aiming at something or applying certain norms. Of course, we are permanently involved in everyday situations to which we respond by recurring to certain stocks of knowledge, as Alfred Schütz puts it. There are always answer models at our disposition, like the expressive repertoire of a skilled actor. But this changes when we stumble in situations for which we are not prepared, in which we do not feel quite at home. Take exceptional situations which overcome us, such as the attempt on the World Trade Center on September 11, or the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Still, the feature of Fremdheit, of otherness or alienness, permeates all our experience in a tacit and inconspicuous way, such as the other's gaze or the other's word, which strikes us whether welcome or not. We become aware how the logos, when you go in this direction of a responding, basic responding, we become aware how the logos originates from a sort of pathos. I say it with Greek words, logos, that means the word, the reason, rationality, everything else. We start from a pathos. Amazing and frightening provoke our response. This is neither, as Aristotle suggests, a logos that we men what the man has, nor, as Heidegger suggests, a logos that has the man. On the whole, a responsive ethics does not postulate new rules and new aims. Instead, it raises the simple question, what are we struck by and what we are responding to while saying this or doing that. Such a responsive ethics goes deeper than the attempts of a communicative ethics and a rational moral focused on common aims and universal norms. It goes back onto a pre-final and pre-normative level of experience. According to Husserl, we need a special kind of ethical epoche which covers, I quote from Husserl, which covers all acts referring to an absolute ought and everything that in this respect is relevant to within the universal practical field. By practicing this epoche, we leave the ground of well-established morals without taking refuge in a sphere of pure moral or in a purely moral community. We will assist at an estrangement of our normal seeing and speaking, which allows for genealogy of the moral. I take this term in Nietzsche's sense, of course not completely, but in a certain sense, yes, Nietzsche, but even Husserl also spoke of a genealogy of logic, is all the offspring of sense, of norms, not only the description of norms which are already there. Such considerations open paths into the, I quote from Nietzsche, into the vast, distant, and so hidden landscape of morals. It is a wonderful formulation. It's not only a system of norms, like for a juridical system, it is a kind of landscape through which we move. Now, in what follows, I will restrict myself to main topics. First, responding as exceeding traditional responsibility. Secondly, the advance of trust, connecting my response to the other with our living with other. The first point, responding, has to do with the inner logic of responding or of responsibility. The second one refers to the special problem of trust. So my next section, responding to the other's demand. A scene taken from Herbert Melville's short story Bartleby may illustrate what is at stake when responding is required. Bartleby, you know the text, I repeat nevertheless. Bartleby is a clerk working as a law copyist in the office of an honorable lawyer at New York. After having for a long time done his work, he refuses his service from one moment to the other, and he does so in a rather strange way. To the lawyer's request to copy the documents as usual, he simply answers with a rarely soft, fast voice, "I would prefer not to." Nothing else. This stereotypically repeated no is a no without ifs and buts, In my book, Antwortregister, I have interpreted this story as a case of response refusal. Obviously, this conversation definitively fails, but it does not fail because the usual standards of intentionality, of communicability, or of utility are neglected. The mentioned sentence can be easily understood. The meaning shows up rather clearly. No practical rules are violated, for who gives up his service does not offend against the regulation like a common striker. At last, the conversation does not fail because what is said does not suit to the circumstances. There are no appropriated circumstances for this escape from the usual. This escape appears as a verbal anticipation of the suicide with which the story finishes indeed. Taken to a house for vagrants, the former clerk refuses eating and literally passes away. Such a kind of communicative refusal makes all attempts made by hermeneutics, discourse analytics, or pragmatics running against a wall. True, there is a dialogical rest left, but this farewell to dialogue consists only in saying no. It happens in the paradoxical form of a negative speech act, such as, I am saying nothing. The speaker says what he does not do, and he does not do what he says. Linguistic pragmatists are inclined to disqualify this linguistic slip as a case of performative contradiction. However, the speaker is really involved in a lived conflict, not in a formal contradiction, saying this which contradicts to other things. He is really involved in a lived conflict, which in German is called Widerstreit, or in French, le différend. Not even the attempt to retreat into silence would suffice to resolve the paradox, since even silence becomes eloquent as soon as somebody has entered the stage of communication. Who keeps silence continues to participate in the conversation, if only as a dark shadow. What the story tells us pertains to a deep dimension which has been already announced under the title of responsivity. The special kind of responding at stake here splits into, on the one side, into the given answer, that is to say, the propositional content which fills in a lacuna of knowledge, and on the other side, the process of giving answer or replying, that is to say, the process of engaging with the other's demand or evading it. The case of the clerk demonstrates that the event of giving exceeds what is giving. First, some words about the doubling of giving answer, then some words about the process of responding. First, what the clerk demonstrates is that the event of giving exceeds what is given. What is given may have a pecuniary value, whereas the event of giving has not. In a similar way, what is said may have a predicative truth value, whereas the event of saying has not. Giving is an event which only lives on by a sort of re-giving, just as the event of saying depends upon a sort of re-saying, of redire, as Levinas puts it. Given answers may become sediments, habits, or a symbolic capital, not so the event of giving an answer which happens here and now. This is a doubling of the event of responding on the side of the respondent. Giving the answer and the giving answer and the given answer. The doubling of responding on the side of the respondent corresponds with the doubling of the demand on the side of the addressee. So we distinguish between the claim to something and the appeal to somebody, both called Anspruch in German. Let us imagine someone complying with a request. At the first sight, this looks rather simple, yet it has to be understood in a double way. On the one side, one can comply with a request by giving what is requested. On the other side, the act of requesting can only be complied if reduced to a mere state of lack. Or take thanks. Thanking somebody for something means more than an empty phrase or a mere accessory. It finds its place in the fissure that separates the given from the giver and the giver from the receiver. Nobody has grasped this crucial issue better than Giuseppe Ungaretti in his two-line poem. I quote in Italian, it's a wonderful short text. Tra un fiore colto e l'altro donato, l'inesprimibile nulla. Between a flower picked up and the other given, the inexpressible nothing. It is a very short description what giving is always a hiatus, what giving means. The double event of a demand and response turns out to be the incorporation of a peculiar logos joined with a certain ethos. Now, this logic of response, which was indicated by the double process of responding and demanding, shows three basic aspects. The first aspect is the aspect of time. It pertains to every responsivity, what I call responsivity. First, the aspect of time. Everything that addresses us in terms of incitation, look, or appeal does not come from ourselves, but comes up to us. This difference of orientation is decisive. What appeals to us reaches us from a distance. It arises too early compared with our own initiative, whereas our response is too late compared with what happens to us. This does not mean that something precedes our initiative, for example, a stimulus which causes a reaction. We rather precede ourselves. This can be expressed paradoxically, taking pattern from Plato's characterization of being in time in his dialogue Parmenides, where Plato says, we can say in the Platonic sense, I am younger and elder than myself. I precede myself, I come after myself. Simultaneously, we are faced with an originary form of precedence and of posteriority. Thus, our speaking and acting is never totally up to date. Our responding is separated from what we are responding to by a hiatus. I use the ancient term diastasis to characterize this peculiar sort of time lag. There are cases of increased experience which bring to light this temporal deferment. Let us first take the shock that is caused by a perplexed event. As Descartes remarks, it makes our body stiffen like a statue. So in the Passions of the Soul. Shocks play a special role in modern aesthetics like that of Walter Benjamin. Moreover, there are traumatic events only to be grasped by their after effects. In his analysis of the Wolfsmann, Freud speaks explicitly of an original sort of Nachträglichkeit, of deferment or posteriority. Derrida was referring to this passage too. In the meantime, the loss of language from which traumatic patients are suffering pertains to the therapeutic everyday. Yet beyond pathological effects, we should consider scientific discoveries or artistic inventions which surprise not only the contemporaries, but first the researchers and the artists themselves. The history of science, scanned by the shift of paradigms, shows plenty of innovations which had to wait for their recognition. Let us lastly refer to the foundation of political or religious orders. Incisive happenings, such as the foundation of Rome, the birth of Christ or Buddha, the Reformation or the French Revolution are only après coup, afterwards changed into dated events inserted into the chronologies of history. Every festival, leaving behind simple routine and economic exploitation, takes on traits of a symbolic re-event. We refer to events which have to be repeated to be present because they are not ready-made results which you can store. So much about the temporality of responsivity. What I did is not to apply a temporal scheme on responsivity. I tried to redefine temporality starting from responding. So it's a special kind of time which comes up in this process of responding. The second aspect has to do with a classical distinction between norms and facts. The second aspect constitutes what I call the inevitability of responding. Influenced by certain traditions, we spontaneously tend to ask whether what happens or appeals to us may be descriptive facts or prescriptive norms. Our answer will be neither nor. The standard distinction between is and ought fails in face of the other's demand. Situational demands such as a request for help or a simple inquiry in the right way do neither amount to mere facts that we register, nor do they come under general law. Under a general law. Some philosophers like to deport such simple incidents into the field of everyday morals, which only matters for sociologists or historians. But by such abstinence, moral gets deprived of its humus. Paul Watzlawick formulated the famous thesis, one cannot not communicate. This double not suggests in the same sense I say we cannot not respond. This double not suggests a sort of being forced, of müssen in German, which constitutes a practical form of necessity. The communicative trap suggested by Watzlawick passes into a responsive trap. The double bind generated by commands such as "do not listen to me" refers to an inner compulsion not to be confused with an outer causation. So much about the inevitability of responding to the other's demand or voice. The third point refers to the question of the subject. Where is the subject in all this process of responding? Concerning this third aspect, the status of the so-called subject or self, in this context, I want to speak of the subject, or better said, of a self. I avoid to speak of a subject because the subject is overcharged already with presuppositions, but the self is much more elementary. I'm not the subject of my pain, but as I myself have the pain, or you have yourself. Now, what's about the subject? Is it death or whatever? Certainly, the liberty of an autonomous being acting out of itself does not vanish under the other's demand and command, yet it will be transformed into what may be called responsive liberty. That means that being an agent, I start, but being a respondent, I start from elsewhere. That is to say, from a place where I am not, where I have not yet been, and where I will never be. I transform the famous definition, Kant's famous definition. Freedom means to start, begin a state by himself. I say, I begin myself, but I begin from elsewhere. That's what I call a responsive liberty, which passes the possibility of a spontaneous liberty. Hereby, I make my appearance in two ways. When responding in this way, by responding to a demand, I appear as a patient to whom something happens and as a respondent who responds to his. So I say the splitting of the self means I have, so to say, two roles which cannot be identified, but here are constituted by this temporal process of coming after. I'm a patient, I'm somebody to whom something happens, and I am a respondent, just responding to what is happening to me. Our self is divided, a divided self, as Lacan or others put it. Nevertheless, answers are not presented as offers on the counter. The answers I give are to be invented, or more precisely, they are found by coming to us. Once again, we are running into a paradox. Like the lover in Lacan's view, the respondent gives what he has, or what he or she does not have. He or she gives what he or she does not have, because what one gives has to be invented in the process of responding. Brecht's poem, The Legend of the Rise of the Book Tote King, in Germany very famous, ends with the following lines. I give the translation. One must first, there is a customer who challenges the wise man and tries to get out his wisdom written down. And the last line sounds like that. One must first tear the wisdom from the wise, so the customer should be thanked too. He has demanded it from him. In German, hat es ihm abverlangt. This is a wonderful text. Tote King makes a pause on the travel over the frontier, and the customer says, please write down, you are a wise man, write down your wisdom. And the end of Brecht, even the customer belongs to the establishment of wisdom, because he has demanded it from him, the demand which precedes the writing down of something by this wise man. The duet of demand and response, of challenge and response, leaves room for overtones and dissonances. This would be, I think, a better model of history than goal-orientated processes and rule-governed actions. Now, the third part, so much very briefly about this internal logic of response. Now, the third part, advance of trust. Now raises the question how a responsive ethics starting from the other's demand is connected with the common aims of a communicative ethics and with the universal norms of moral. If there were no connection at all, our common life would be confined to an oasis far from society and history, and the relation to the other would be restricted to a dyad of I and you. Our search for a social cement connecting otherness and sociality will start with the motive of trust. I guess you have heard so much already about trust, but I was not here, so I say what I have to say. Something would be perhaps repeated. A trust called pistis in Greek, or fides or fiducia in Latin, has first of all to do with the other. In this respect, it resembles justice, which in Aristotle's view constitutes a virtue in relation to the other, pros heteron. It's a rare cases where the other appears in Greek thinking, literally the other, pros heteron. One gives credence to somebody or proves to be credible. In the great tradition of practical philosophy, trust plays only an incidental part, since its binding force arises from elsewhere. This shows up in an exemplary way in Aristotle's and Hobbes' conception of social life. This will be a short critical part referring to Aristotle and Hobbes and then looking for an alternative. In the view of Aristotle, trust is a natural element of every community which holds together by common aims in life. Its genuine place is the area of friendship. Becoming friend with another presupposes that the other can be trusted in every respect and that one can rely on him or her, especially in precarious situations. Friendship constitutes a sphere of confidence and familiarity which grows out of a process of living together, including the proverbial eating thought together. We find in Aristotle too. In addition to it, public friendship, the other point, public speech is supported by trust, since the orator will not persuade his audience unless he proves by his ethos, by his way of life, to be trustworthy. By contrast, mistrust prepares a fertile soil for enmity, splitting the political community in isolated parts and driving it into violent conflicts with other states. In Book 9 of Plato's Republic and in Book 5:11 of the Aristotelian Politics, the tyrannus is depicted in the glaring colors of an all-penetrating mistrust and suspicion. But apart from such a generation of personal and political life, trust is omnipresent like the air we are breathing. As an ingredient of sociability pre-given by nature, it seems so self-evident that it does not even appear on the current lists of virtues. If you take Aristotle, the list, or the Stoics, the list of virtues. Now Hobbes. This social tableau changes in the modern era. Thomas Hobbes describes the natural state, as we know, as a permanent war nourished by the fear of death. The self-preservation of the individual functions as an asocial impulse, excluding any common good. It engenders, on the one side, a nucleus of self-confidence, relying on one's own forces. On the other side, a fundamental mistrust with regard to the other. That's the starting point. Both aspects are part of our human condition. As symptomatic appears the situation of traveling, which brings us in contact with unknown and foreign people. We have the same example in Aristotle, whereas Aristotle mitigates the dangerous aspects of this situation, referring to widespread philanthropic impulse. I use the philanthropy in this context. Hobbes gathers from the same situation, being on travel, clear signs of a spontaneous mistrust. This makes us, as he says, lock the door before going to sleep and carry with a sword when traveling. The whole society seems covered by an atmosphere of mistrust. So it's a good advice he gives. So we do well to leave a party last in order to make sure that nobody will talk bad about us. It shows the mistrust, fundamental mistrust. A chance to conquer the mistrust and to compensate for the lacking bond of friendship seems only to be given for Hobbes in concluding an artificial contract. But even a contract will never completely eradicate the mistrust, which will only be delayed. The mistrust penetrates the contract because everybody has to pay an advance of trust when the contract is going to be concluded. Here, I think it's very, even for phenomenologists, interesting reference to time in the practical sense. In Hume, the same. The contract is a question of time. You give before you get. In contrast with secondary contracts, which are supported by an existing contract law, the primary contract, known as a social contract, a social contrat social, is based on unfulfilled promises whose precedence generates a time lag similar to the above-mentioned one between the demand and my response. There's a time lag between both. To be sure, one can calculate risk like the required advancement of trust, but this will not enable the contract to insure itself. Though this I give so that you give, but how can I make sure that you will give, that you will really give? Trust and faith appear to be the bond of contracts, as Hobbes puts it, but a trust regulated by institutions does not coincide with a trust in institutions. There makes a difference. There is a trust by institutions, by the contract, but this contract by institution does not coincide with the trust in constitutions, what is in the beginning of the contract. The former, the regulated trust, is not a sufficient safeguard against the breakdown of institutions. In order to warrant stability, the state recurs to control measures. Explorers and listeners, these are the words of Hobbes, explorers and listeners, reduced to mere instrument of the tyrant in the view of Aristotle, advance in Hobbes to members of the civil service comparable to the, as Hobbes says, as the beams of sun and to the spider's web's finest threads. They belong to the context, to the text of a state institution. As precursors of the Big Brother, they pertain to the prehistory of espionage and secret service. Through the latent or open mistrust separating not only citizens from citizens, but the ruled from the ruler too, the normal state takes on features of a surveillance state. Notwithstanding various doubts, we must admit that this state model proposed by Hobbes is instructive in its own way. We really learn that trust has to be taken neither as a gift of nature nor as a tacit trust which spontaneously arises between the governed and the governor, as the liberal Locke assumes. I think this is too optimistic, the liberalism of Hume, of Locke. Trust rather emerges from contingent trust foundations responding to specific risks and dangers. The permanent recourse to situations of insecurity reinforces the impact of time. Trust does not simply exist or not exist, it lasts. It has a temporal duration. Foucault's basic fact saying that there is order, il y a de l'ordre, corresponds to the likewise basic fact that there is trust, not less, not more. This fact can neither be transformed into a stock of trust nor booked as a moral capital. There's always a risk behind. In the course of time, a lot of partial solutions have been tested. One reserves trust for a friendly intimacy where we open the heart to each other, so Kant, while delivering the public to a sort of wholesome suspicion. How easily vigilance turns into a surveillance has already been shown. More dangerous is a claim to realize trust, just as for Hegelians reason has to be realized, verwirklicht, till up to the consequences of a bloody fight for fraternity. Today, that would be the realized freedom, would realize trust. I think there's a totalitarian danger in the background. Today, the patchwork prevails. The concept of trust often contains a mix-up of readiness for cooperation, of sentimental proximity, and of risk calculation close to financial operations and stock jobbery. The system theory provides more sophisticated tools. In his treatise on Vertrauen, on trust, Niklas Luhmann characterizes trust as the reliance upon one's own expectations. The reliance upon one's own expectations. We expect that something will not happen, although it might happen. In this sense, trust returns to the mechanism of reducing social complexity based on a risky form of advance payment that had nothing to do with the otherness of the other. I think it's a very pragmatic view, what you find in Luhmann in a very sophistical way. Now the alternative, how can looks a possible alternative? My own proposal is focused on the question, in which way and to what extent can and must we emit a special sort of responsive trust? Such a responsive approach does by no means exclude institutional and professional forms of trust, still it goes beyond them. As already indicated, a trust is generally founded by our responding to special challenges. What is extremely important in this context is the ambivalence of alienness oscillating between friendly and hostile alienness, between incitation and menace. Confronted with ambivalent situation, we are forced to evaluate putting our cards on the table. Trust, in his fight against mistrust, seems to be a primary response to the other's demand. But how is the demand coming from the other transformed into a trust taking place between us? On the whole, the phenomenon of trust refers to the bond, the nexus, which holds together the number of a community, creating the due solidarity. Solidarity does not mean something like an affective fusion, a radical homogeneity, or a fixed common good. It simply means that one does not separate one's own well-being from that of the others. That means solidarity. What is at stake here is the Sinn, the Kon, or in German the Mit, without which there were nothing like a koinonia in Greek, a community or society. Shortly, there were no living together, no Mitsein, Heidegger. By the way, Mitsein, Heidegger, that's a literary translation of the being with others, synenai, in Aristotle. On the one hand, the simple contract does not suffice. It comes too late to generate social relations. On the other hand, nature would constitute a dubious bond. As well known from our common history, numerous things are imputed to nature. For example, an ethnic sort of barbarism in the Greek, Plato and Aristotle, the existence of slaves by nature, again Aristotle, the natural subordination of women, a natural hierarchy of races, and so forth. Nature seems to be patient like paper. In German we say Papier ist geduldig. I don't know if you have the same proverb. Paper is patient. With a Papier ist geduldig. It tolerates everything. You can write everything on the paper. So nature seems to be patient like paper. Responsivity, our leading motive, points into another direction. We have to assume a genuine hiatus between you and me, between the alien and the own. A synthesis emerges only on the level of aims which we share, on the level of norms to which each of us is submitted, or on the level of habits which one has embodied. Arising from the double event of demand and response, trust has to be considered as a pre-final, again a pre-final and pre-normal Sinn or with. It simply comes out. There is trust. But how does this happen? It cannot be granted by contracts and is not given by nature. But how does this trust happen? Let us inspect the phenomenon of trust more precisely. In general terms, trust can be understood as a practical attitude towards others. In contrast to single acts such as promising, trust arises in an implicit and tacit way as something like an unlimited credit. We read in the Hugo von Hofmannsthal Book of Friends, I quote, "One has to believe in somebody on the whole to give credence for him or her in details." We might call this a sort of Fremdglaube, I say it in German, a belief in others, which like the Husserl's Weltglaube, the belief in the world, precedes any explicit form of yes and no. When Levinas emphasized the command, "You will not kill me," he invokes a borderline experience which highlights the risk of any normality. The breach of trust shows that what trust means. Viewed from an eidetic or structural standpoint, trust clearly differs from simple forms of belief by referring to somebody as to its addressee. To believe that something is a case means nothing else than a diminished form of knowledge which allows for probability calculations. But trust goes beyond this. It means that I believe in others, carried by the conviction that they mean what they say, that they do not deceive me, and that their utterance are free from any arrière-pensée. I presuppose that they are well disposed to me, even in cases of conflict. Traditionally speaking, trust includes benevolence. Trust displays its temporal horizon while expanded to the future by promising by the past of fidelity and forgiving. But trust is really effective here and now in our words, deeds, and gestures. Trust, not proving to be trust, would remain ineffectual. Yet proofs of trust do not furnish to any sort of irrefutable evidence. People become trustworthy precisely in the same way as a public orator obtains his quality in the course of time. Trust grows and vanishes like friendship and love. It gets stabilized by official and personal rituals of trust, among them the multiple expression of smile, or the pledge about which Marcel Mauss is writing, is a ritual of trust. But it is more difficult to show in which way trust is shaped by the crucial event of demand and response. Does trust primarily mean something that I give and owe to the other, or something the other offers to me, or something that is going on between us? It strikes us that Levinas's ethics of the other seems merely to neglect the phenomenon of trust. I don't find it in his writings. It is not so difficult to say why it is so. The unconditioned demand arising from the other's face excludes any attempt to make my own response dependent from the benevolence of the other. Provided that the same is to be expected from the other, nothing would move between us in the case of conflict. In the end, we would stumble into the vicious circle of mutual distrust which fertilizes itself. At the best, others would concern me as my own friends, my companions, or co-citizens. Alienness, which exceeds any common order, would be suppressed. Trust would be nothing more than an enlarged form of self-confidence, just as for Aristotle, friendship ultimately amounts to an enlarged form of self-friendship. This may be the reason why Levinas starts from the abrupt command, "You will not kill me." This harsh command is based on an ethical resistance from which every confidential approximation bounces over. The unconditioned demand speaks out of the murderous face as well. Imposing to it any restriction, we would return into the limits of a friendship, ethics, or law-like moral. The other's alienness would be overrun by established forms of ethics and moral that refuse being contested. After all, trust does not originate from what we expect from others, but from the confidence we give. Now I want to say after the problem of belief in the other, something about the advance of trust, giving trust or confidence to the other. Like every sort of giving, which consists in offering presents and exceeding the mutual exchange, giving credence to means giving in advance. Nobody can claim to being trusted. responsive trust only occurs in terms of advance of trust, full of risk. Whoever gives will never be sure whether something comes back. Mistrust precisely means that the advance is refused or only given with hesitation. One tries to avoid the disappointments by adopting a wait-and-see attitude. Mistrust is not the same as hostility, but it leads to it unless our legitimate suspicion is reigned by a basic trust. One may tolerate refusing trust as an attitude of prudence, which takes into account human weakness and maliciousness, but prudential rules do not allow us simply to refuse trust as if one could get rid of the inevitability of response by prejudging the other's demand. We would commit the logical error of a prius posterius. Does it mean that there is no bond between us except by distributing duties and chances in the name of the third party or of society? Now, these are some questions, questiones disputate. The next aspect, reciprocity. This question leads us to the reciprocity of trust. A perfect form of reciprocity would require a previous comparison according to the golden rule. At this point, Levinas seems to be right, but is this all? Indeed, giving confidence includes inspiring or arousing confidence. Arousing does not mean producing something, but making something happen, as by calling someone's attention. Usually, arousing is not performed by an explicit act. We rather arouse the other's trust by saying or doing something. The arousal of trust is part of an elementary genealogy previous to the calculation of affects. I would be simply unable to place confidence in somebody's behavior if I would expect the other misusing and lastly killing me. My gesture of confidence would lose its addressee. Consequently, our expression of confidence does not only contain the promise, I shall not kill you, it's Levinas, but also the expectation, you will not kill me. In accordance with Levinas, I prefer such extreme utterances in order to reach the extreme point of enmity instead of sticking to innocuous situations. However, trust does neither consist in running against the wall of an ethical resistance, nor in being possessed by the other in terms of a hostage, Levinas. It rather makes something going on between us. That is really missing in Levinas. Trust means something going on between us. Quite in this way, the obligation pronounced as you shall not enters into social relations. Arousing confidence means neither producing trust nor simply waiting for it. To the extent that trust is responsive, it is creative too, giving a response which makes flourish something new between us. Now, as I shorten a little bit my text, the next point is a question of trust conditions. Of course, there are trust conditions. They belong to every institutions, but I think that will not enough. The trust or confidence has to be taken as a process. I emphasize the verb to confidence, confidere as a verb, not a substantive or something you have. The bond which underlies the reciprocal trust depends on the dynamic of a binding in actu. Trust tends to evaporate and dissolve unless it is renewed again and again. Our expression of confidence is not confined to what is said, it is performed in terms of saying. Similar to the act of giving mentioned above, it is dependent upon a repeated act of resaying. In this aspect, it conforms the performance of speech acts which cannot be replaced by the presentation of documents. Some short remarks, then I come to the end. It is a little bit, have I some minutes, still some minutes. Some words about the history of trust. Trust is running through a history of trust. The foundation of trust goes back to the life experience of the little child. This has been shown by the investigations of René Spitz or John Bowlby, focusing on the bodily dialogue between the baby and its reference person and on the child's attachment to the mother. Quite similarly, Erickson speaks of starts from a social zero, speaking of a basic trust and a primary conflict between primal anxiety and primal hope. Such a primary trust, accompanied by the dark shadows of a primary distrust, should not be interpreted as a natural base, but as a premature phase of a history by which the self grows up in permanent exchange with significant others. Part of the social history is the early smile of the child, which has been often commented on the lines of Virgil's risu cognoscere matrem, recognize the mother by a smile. The initial differentiation of familiar and unfamiliar figures is marked by a peculiar form of becoming alien, which in German is called Fremdeln. Fremdeln, it is a German word, to become alien. The baby makes a difference between familiar and unfamiliar figures. The smile appears as a primary response announcing the trust in the benevolence of the so-called good enough mother, Winnicott. Obviously, smile turns out to be more than a neurophysiologic reaction to be described on the basis of behavior of observations and brain studies. Only if we adopt the participant's perspective, we understand how a specific relation to the other comes up, exceeding the mere satisfaction of natural needs. The smile manifests a responsive surplus, which can be expressed in various ways. Responsive forms of trust never arise in terms of a simply spontaneous confidence literally placed in the other. It rather constitutes the echo of a gift one receives. The gift may be missing or poisoned. Early distortions affecting the relations to the other are not only known from wrecked families, but as a specific form of a hospitalism too. It is difficult to imagine that the high command, "You will not kill me," will have something to say for persons lacking the full experience of being trusted by others. The genesis of trust is permeated by elements of what Freud describes as drive destiny, Triebgeschick, and what Jean Laplanche derives from the other's originary implantation in me. An unconditioned demand arising from the face of the other or from a categorical law cannot skip over concrete conditions. It only exceeds and contests them. Such conditions are not only conditions of realization, but conditions of susceptibility, including the impact of trust. A final brief remark. Let me conclude with a final remark concerning the perspective of respective ethics. Our considerations lead us to what I call a sort of unsociability within the sociability delineated by the utopia of Socrates. As a citizen, Socrates belonged to Athens, but not completely, considering the fact that he liked to put in question what was taken for granted. Indeed, whenever someone says "we," it is me, you, or somebody else who speaks, not we. We cannot start from a ready-made we on a community already given. Every we, whether representing family, people, church, class, or society, is a broken we. It turns into a tyrannus without tolerating deviates and dissidents. What is alien or strange is never a simple failure we should get rid of, but rather a stimulus able to wake us up from the sleep of normalization. The responsive ethics I proposed could function as a permanent corrective. I thank you for your attention.
Yes, we'll entertain questions, please. And in respect to the talk, or Dr. Waldenfels is actually also extended to other issues, but we might think about the last part in particular, the rather remarkable, dense, complex, challenging idea of trust that he here sets forth. But whatever you'd like to question.
I'd like you to say a bit more about your last remarks on reciprocity. And you talk about trust almost as a kind of an operation which has a vectorial quality, a directional quality. I give to the other confidence, and it's on the basis of that confidence that the other will either trust or not trust me. And the reciprocity would have to do with the other doing the same for me. My question is, are these two vectors only contingently related? That is, the other may come to trust me because I give the other confidence. It's totally unrelated to whether or not I'll trust the other because he or she will give me confidence. Or is there an internal connection between those two vectors?
I say it is first it is reciprocity in a very special sense, not in the normal sense where you can change your position. I'm on your position, you are on mine, and we can change our perspectives. It is a broken reciprocity in kind of a double asymmetry. I am referring to the other who is referring to me, but there is no synthesis. And so for the confidence, I'm asking what is going between us. My critic is, if you take it for granted as Aristotle, we are social by nature. I say the unsocial aspect in human existence. And you cannot refer to a contract. I give trust to you because I'm living with you under the state of law and so on. But there is something between us, and I take it first, there is trust, something is happening between us, and the aspects I try to describe have to do with this open process. It is open, I said, I give contest to the other. That is more than only obey to the command of the other, as Levinas puts it. It's more than that. But this giving confidence is always risky. I can never know whether the other will do the same. When I wait that the other will do the same, nothing will happen. What I call the vicious circle of mutual mistrust. Like the Cold War. Everyone said we need weapons because the others threaten us by their weapons, and they said the same. So it was a very perverse reciprocity. Both said the same, but in two directions. And I think the break there on the side of Levinas, we have to start from the other. The other is more than something which is only mistrusted like a wild savage animal. But this risk can, it is a giving as responding to the other which cannot be derived from anything else. It is like a gift. To give confidence like a gift. You cannot make claim on a gift, then it is not a gift, then it is a duty. And to have the duty to trust to the other on the elementary level, that makes no sense. That is only on the formal institutions. And so giving confidence to the other, respecting that the other, not only where I made a little correction to Levinas, Levinas doesn't speak about confidence, not at all. It's true. What is going on between us, there is the other, the asymmetry, the demand of the other, and I have to respect the other and to answer to the demand of the other. But what is going on between us, I cannot, I said, I skipped a passage. If I take the other as a wolf, I cannot even make a contract with him. Then the contract is on a very loose soil. It means giving confidence to others means what I say. I expect you will not kill me, and to say I have not to care of that. That is his part. I think that I cannot leave things open. I deal with somebody as somebody who will not kill me where nevertheless is right. I cannot put conditions. I only respect you when you do the right things. I have to, the cognition is without conditions, but nevertheless there is some expression what I call arousing of confidence. I think confidence, how it is created, it is aroused. It can be on both sides. And there are unilateral situations where the other side doesn't not work with, and that would be the conflict case. What we do, we are the wolf for everybody's a wolf for the other, or somebody tries to deal with the wolf as if he would not be a wolf. It's a kind of wette, of pari,
Just a quick follow-up. This is the reason that I still find it a little bit confusing. The other can indeed satisfy me, if you will, by trusting me if I give them confidence.
Yeah.
Now, with that, it seems to me they could satisfy me by trusting me, but they could still not necessarily give me confidence. It seems to me you could satisfy the condition of trusting without giving the other confidence. So I don't see the sort of conceptual connection between the two. So the other could fail to, how should I put it, respond to my gift of confidence in a couple of ways, either by not trusting and or by not giving confidence in return. Are they the same for you? Are they connected?
No, they are not. They're open arousal. It's a complicated process. Also, it is due to you that somebody is looking to things, arouse the attention or arouse the confidence, but it does not create the confidence of the other. It is not sufficient. There are not sufficient conditions that the other will have confidence in me. But nevertheless, I'm involved. I participate in creating. Arousal is not producing confidence. I cannot produce it. Like the other has to give confidence to me, but I cannot postulate. That would be not a gift. So it is an open process, but I have not. I cannot wait what the other does. Then we are on the level of the basic mistrust of calculation, and as Luhmann puts, this is our own expectations, which with account, and that has not to do with the otherness. I tried to pick into this abrupt vis-a-vis of the face of the other, and my like Levinas describes, like the murder. I have to, even the murder is another man. I have to accept him, but I cannot accept his essay of murdering me. So it will be a very passivity, masochism. So I expect that the other will not use violence or will have some trust in me, but it cannot be produced. It is an open process going between me and the other, and from the other side the same. I cannot replace the confidence of the other in me. But I think it is a crossing process, but not a combination, not a synthesis. Where there are the same conditions for us both. The contract tried to create conditions for both who are in similar situations. I give my word, and the other does too. And in the background, there's a judge. When we fail, then he will correct us. This is the institutional created confidence by rules and by contract. But there is the question against, there I find Hobbes interesting, but even in this case, you cannot, the institution, the contract is not a sufficient reason, doesn't imply a sufficient reason just to keep to the contract. So there is always open, there is always, there is trust, but the trust is not a fundament of which you can count with. And this, what can we do in this open place? Hobbes says we are always in a conflict, and the contract is a certain solution, but the savage is the background, and I say, but it is possible to create contrast not only from moment to moment, but in living together. But it is an open process. It cannot be guaranteed that the other will have trust me, or like the friendship, which is if you take the old theory. So I like Hobbes because he is a sharp posits the question. In Aristotle, there are friends and enemies. Enemies are nature. Even Plato, the barbarians are enemies. There's no, so there is we are among unter uns, among ourselves, and so this confidence is a very narrow confidence. And how can we open it to a human, even to the alien or to the enemy, to the borderline figures? And Hobbes goes to the borderline. That's, I think, he puts the question. We have to say, what does it mean to have confidence in the enemy? Something which saddens me. But it cannot be some feeling only, but a process. How create confidence.
Well, Lorenzo's question raises an issue that I thought you were going to talk more about, which is the connection between trust and vulnerability. That is, you only trust in conditions where you really are vulnerable, or someone has power to hurt you. I mean, I don't trust a sheep not to hurt me. I only trust something that may potentially be a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
And Sheets-Johnston writes about how trust arises from the corporeal exposure to vulnerability. That is, I can, the inauthentic response may be to try to become invulnerable so that others cannot hurt me. I seal myself off from the environment and others. But trust may be to allow myself to be open to a situation of vulnerability. And so I was, and that is not, trust is not necessarily virtue, and it's not necessarily, it's not good to do that all the time. You have to be discerning in your trust. So I'm wondering in this gift that you refer to, whether vulnerability isn't part of what provokes the gift of trust.
I took the vulnerability because I think we have always to look for the extreme possibilities. Otherwise, we make good weather ethics for between friends and so, as Aristotle does. And we go to the extreme point, then we have to ask. Take again Locke. I quoted him. There's a tacit consent, tacit trust between ruler and ruled, but when there's another state, he makes war. Then, even Locke writes, then he will turn into a natural state, and I can treat him like a beast. I can kill him like a wolf or a bear. Then he changed. The enemy is changed in something I can destroy without bad consciousness. But I think you have always, if you have the ethics of the other, you have to include even somebody who threatens you. He tries to kill you. There, I think even Kant says the same. Even the criminal person is a human being, so it's not only somebody which can be against which I can protect me like against a beast. And so there's the extreme point of the vulnerability we have to in mind, but there is a certain normality of the trust when living together. And it is not only violence. Trust can be in words and how we speak to each other, a lot of things. It belongs to the everyday life too. But in the background, I think, has to be the last point. What about the enemy? Otherwise, we make ethics, friendship ethics. And friendship ethics, it is a parochial ethics. And that's why I'm referring to the violence in Hobbes. And Levinas does the same, that you will not kill me. Why I'm always speaking of this possibility, this extreme possibility. I'm annihilated by the other.
We have two questions here, Eduardo and Jeff. Yeah, Eduardo? Yeah.
Yes, Professor Waldenfels, would you link, it seemed to me that you were linking the diaesthetic to the atopos that you mentioned. The atopos. You talked,
yeah.
Are they co-originary?
The atopos end?
and the diesthetic, that the temporal dissonance, or the temporal gap that exists between.
Oh, I see.
And I've found that fascinating how you began by talking about the
Mm.
temporal gap that exists in response, and then you ended up with Socrates,
Mhm.
who is atopos.
Yes, yes.
And the we is always disrupted.
Yeah,
And I wonder if these two conditions, the temporal gap,
yeah,
and they've always already been
Yeah.
atopos,
yeah.
are co-originary. And
Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would say the time cannot split time and space. I say the temporal lag, a temporal difference has a spatial aspect too. I often speak of elsewhere. There's the place of the other. There's a spatial conception. But I'm here now. I'm here now. That is time and time, place. That means the situations, and the otherness of the other means that even there is a splitting between being here and being elsewhere.
but when you say I'm here now,
Mm.
you're already too late to yourself.
Yes, yes, right. So the here is a double here. The here of speaking, and the here I'm speaking about. And so the atopy starts. Yes, you are right. It starts with a splitting of my own speech when I say I am here now. Even the I and the here and now, everything is doubled. It is the I and here and yes of speaking, of the enunciation. And I'm speaking about myself. I'm saying I'm here. I'm saying in Stony Brook and so on. And this is a splitting. And the here of speaking is a non-view because it cannot be described. It's the place from where I start when I say here and now. And atopia means nobody is completely at the place where he is. It is an elementary Ortsverschiebung. I call it Ortsverschiebung, difference of place. Not only in reference to the other, but also in reference to myself. And that, as you are right, it has to do with this diastasis, or the temporal process between demand and response, which has also a spatial aspect. And in the end, to put it in the end, to take Aristotle as somebody, he describes a situation where there is a problem of the trust. When I'm completely at home, then there is no problem of trust. The trust only to people which don't belong to the we. And in the we, there is no fundamental problem. But if I say I'm not completely here, I'm in a certain distance, I'm a dissident in a certain sense, then there is a process of renewal of the trust. It cannot be taken for granted. And Socrates, I was referring to Kant. He says there is a gesellige Ungeselligkeit, social unsociality, unsociality within sociality. We are not completely integrated in our society. And so that is the precondition for the problem of trust. Because first you have to ask who is asking for that. I wonder, it's an issue now. But if you have a discourse theory, for example, it's nothing of trust. And Habermas never writes about trust. I'm a discourse, there are some rules, there are arguments, and trust doesn't, it has to do with the establishment of a certain order, not working within a certain order. So it's, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, you made a comment about halfway through the talk. You said you found it striking that trust had not appeared on any Aristotelian or Platonic list of virtues.
Could you, difficult to understand.
I found it striking that trust had never appeared on any list of the virtues. And
Yeah.
Aristotelian or Platonic list,
Yeah,
some
yeah.
Stoic or Epicurean list
Yeah.
of virtues. Well, the thought that I had when you said that is, well, how could it? One could understand how trustworthiness could figure in an account of friendliness, friendship, or how the trait of being trustful could figure in an account of some particular virtue, such as friendliness. But trust itself, how could that figure in any kind of account of a virtue as a dispositional quality or set of dispositional properties of an agent. So I suppose what I'm interested in asking you in view of this line of questioning is how does trust fit in into the account of moral virtue that you see as part of your project, of responsive ethics?
Well, I mentioned it doesn't appear in the list of virtues, but if you're right, it could not. It is not a virtue. It could not appear there, because when you have a virtue ethics and you don't speak about that, it is another context. I think the trust belongs to the problematization of the process of living with others, and which is presupposed with. Aristotle defines human being as a politikon, a zoon politikon, an animal living with others, living together with others. This cement, this bound, nexus, is presupposed already and taken as given by nature. And so the problem of trust becomes only a problem when the otherness of the other is not guaranteed by a community of common games, of common aims, or of common rules. And so it is a very modern problem, I think. You find it that the contract theory is a theory where the sociality, that's the great Hobbes, is not taken as granted. How sociability is created, is generated. And in this very situation, you cannot refer to, wait, we are living together, we have laws and laws of nature. And then we have to define the truth in a new way. It has to do with what does it mean to live with others in an open way, so that the bond between us is not completely guaranteed by common aims, common institutions, common rules, and so on. And I was referring to Marcel Mauss, very short, about the Pfand, the Pignus.
What?
That's Pfand. Pfand.
F-O-N-D?
No, is
P-F-A-N-D?
Pfand. P-F-A-N-D. Pfand. It is. Marcel Mauss is writing about that a lot.
Is it in the gift?
Yes, it's in the gift. Yes, of course, yeah. It is a difficult word for me too. I don't use it very often, so, but I had it in my text. Wait a moment. It's a pledge, yes, the pledge.
Pledge.
And the pledge has to do with a generation of a context of a task between us. The pledge is something we give, and like a symbol. But in the great social theories of the Greek or Kant, and you don't find this, because it is taken for granted that the others are there. And so it is a very modern situation. And, again, I say it has to do with the attitude to the others. It is not virtue. It's the attitude to the others, or living with the others. It's not a virtue like a habit which I adopt.
Could you comment on the way that trust figures into hospitality? Because in hospitality, I make myself open to the other entering my house, and I trust that this other will not kill me, will not harm me. So in a weird way, hospitality, which we often discuss separately, much discussed in recent discourse, raises issues of trust, because I, the host, must trust that the guest will not actually harm me by opening the door, by giving space, and so forth. So there's a curious situation here where my very generosity brings with it what Bob Priest was calling vulnerability, and I must trust that. I must actually give to the other my confidence that the other will not harm me. Now this is short of pledge, because we don't need to actually have an oath of the sort that Marcel Mauss was talking about, but implicitly, I open the door, I say, come on in, right? And so is not a moment of trust, but now within the threshold circumstance of hospitality between myself and the stranger. Well, I'm just trying to tease out your thoughts about how hospitality, which I know you've written about separately, but how would you relate it to this topic of trust?
It is a certain. I was provoked to speak about trust. I never did it before. I have to reflect the many aspects I cannot overlook now at the moment. But I think the hospitality for me, that the other is in a situation of hospitality, but he doesn't neither completely belong to us, to our house, and is not completely outside like a savage animal. He's on a threshold, and he's more than a person who has certain duties, certain rights, like a co-citizen and so on. And in this open situation, it's like the gift. As a gift, I think we have to treat with these problems as phenomena of exceedance who go beyond the borderlines or the limits of a certain social order, like the gift. The gift cannot be integrated, which is when it's exchange rules, it's not a gift. And the trust is the same. So giving confidence means not have an exchange based on a certain rule. So it is an open place, and it has to do with the otherness of the other, which cannot completely integrate it in a social order. And that means hospitality, and the trust is much explicit in this situation, I think. We could go look for the connection between both motives, and but I wondered when I prepared this speech why Levinas never mentioned it. I couldn't find it anywhere, and so that was my attempt just to show he doesn't write about what is going on between us, the intercorporeality too, and the living together, because there is the face of the other, the otherness, and we are in a certain rule of the third, where we are homogenized already. But this is an open process like giving, and hospitality has to do with this open process of giving and greeting, even some rituals. It is not duty to greet, for greeting. It's not duty in general, not. It is a giving. These are phenomena on the borderline of the normality, of morality, of all this, and trust has to do with it. And this others would be incorporated trust within the society, but this would not be enough. And for me, it was Hobbes is for me very important because all modern societies are based on certain contracts, constitutions, and so on. And there's always a problem that this constitution cannot preserve themselves. There are not sufficient reason. If I give a promise, I cannot give the promise, I will keep the promise. I can do that, but it's pure rhetoric. I do it or not. The promise is always a risk, which I cannot avoid by making the promise more complicated. For the Constitution, it's the same. You could put a paragraph in the Constitution. It is forbidden to breach the Constitution. But a revolutionary would say, well, fine, but I don't accept the Constitution. So you cannot, there is an open breach in every constitution or every contract and every promise. So the breach of mistrust shows that there is a factuality of trust which cannot be based in some essential structures or in universal rules. And yes, the risk would be a problem which is very close to this problem too. There are a lot of you attempts just to thematize the risk in Germany too, in your country, I think that's the same. Beck has written Risikogesellschaft, a society of risk.
Well, if